TranslaStars podcast. On this interview, we have Andrea Zúñiga. She started her copywriting journey before she even graduated. She began working in social media at an American agency, and this led her into the copywriting world, both in English and Spanish. Shortly after, she founded Ellipsis Copywriting, which led her to sharpen her copywriting skills. After working as a copywriter and content writing for international startups such as Home, she entered the world of UX writing for the fintech world, which she is currently working at. So thank you for being here, Andrea.
Hi, thank you for having me.
So you could start us by telling us a little bit about how was your journey from copywriting to UX writing?
Yeah, of course. Well, I began as a copywriter because I really liked working in marketing. I thought having graduated from like a Spanish literature degree that the most natural path, if I didn't want to go into academia, was going to marketing. So that's why I figured out what copywriting was, and then I just wanted to like start working in that area because I really liked writing, but I also like the strategic parts of marketing and figuring out brands and their voice and so on and stuff like that. But then after I founded Ellipsis and started working with different clients and for different companies, I realized that I was also very interested in like the tech world. I had like this frustrated dream of being a software engineer, and that never worked out because I didn't have the brain for programming or coding. So when I found out that there was this thing called UX writing, I found like I hit the jackpot because I knew that like these two worlds collided where I could explore like the tech industry and everything about user experience, which was very interesting to me, while also applying copywriting, but not through marketing, but through products. So yeah, I started copywriting, and then I found out that there was this world of UX writing and started researching and doing like courses online and just learning from all of the resources, all of the free resources that I could find, and started like building a small portfolio. And through Ellipsis, I could work like with web copy and stuff like that. That's still kind of connected to UX writing. So that's when I decided like to make the leap and start applying to these jobs more focused on UX writing with a product.
Yeah, that's so interesting because like that close relationship between copy and UX, and some people still think they're the same, but they're not. So how would
Yeah.
you describe that difference? Like how would you describe UX writing?
Well, basically, I think the difference resides on who, like what the final, I don't know, like where you see that copy after you write it. So, for example, copywriting is for a product, for marketing or for sales. You can see it on a billboard, and you can see it on a magazine, or it's through a blog or something. So copywriting is more closely related to marketing and sales, while UX writing, it's basically just for the user experience through digital products mainly. So like apps or websites or a software. So UX writing, it's more concise in a way, concise as in short, because you write instructions or you write micro copy for buttons and stuff like that. So copywriting is basically the marketing world, while UX writing is for the product world, and product as in digital products. And another big difference is that copywriting can be an individual job in a way. You can be a copywriter and work as a freelancer, and you're the only copywriter, and that's fine. You can work out, you can write and present a pitch or something, or like a certain copy, and you can work by yourself. But in UX writing, it's kind of impossible to work by yourself because you rely so much on like the UX designers and product managers and the software engineers that are creating these products. So while copywriting is like an individual job that you can do by yourself, UX writing relies on a whole team to make it happen.
Yes. So like in your experience, what would you say are the main difference or challenges to writing UX in English and in Spanish?
Well, it's a very, I think the main differences is that Spanish has such long words. Like you know, we love to talk, we love to add a lot of details and adjectives and stuff. And in our language has like longer words that sometimes isn't as easy to translate into a small screen where you don't want to have so much text. So I think writing in Spanish has like this added difficulty just because the language is more, I wouldn't say more complex, but sometimes it may not be as direct as English is. And for digital products, when writing in English, you kind of have more of like a benchmark of other great applications that have like this very concise language and terminology. So I think the main difference is that in English, you can be more straightforward and you can find shorter words, while in Spanish, you need to, it's a bit more difficult to find one word that describes an action. You normally need two or three. So in UX writing, it's very important to keep it short, and it's way harder to do that in Spanish than it is in English.
Yes, right now that made me think like this question of usually use so much English like Spanglish. Is it ever any like, is it an option to like, oh, let's just leave the button in English? Is that possible? Have you seen it happen?
I think it depends a lot on what product you're writing for and like in what industry you're in and stuff. Because for example, I work in the fintech industry, so we have like will be like a digital wallet or like a digital bank. So there are a lot of like hard words that you need to work around to present like the friendlier version for the user.
Mm-hmm.
But for example, it's some like English words living in Mexico, especially in northern Mexico. For example, the word selfie would be like something that you use in your everyday life. And for example, a bank app here, BBVA, when you have to take like your verification photo or like yeah, when you do like that security thing, it says selfie. Like the word that they use for you to take a picture of yourself is selfie. And when I was writing that for the product that I work on, for that ID verification thing, I thought that we could just use selfie because I saw it on another bank app and it's a word that I use in my everyday life. So I thought like we could just leave it in English. But then once we took it to like user testing and usability testing, we kind of saw that people kind of understood the word, but when we asked them about it, they said that they would just prefer for someone to use the word like fotografía, so like photo, or self-portrait, like autorretrato. So although my first instinct was to just use the word in English, once you test it in the real world, for some people like that Spanglish isn't like their default way of speaking, it doesn't make any sense. So although sometimes it's frustrating for me, I always have to think about the final user and whether or not they will use that word in English or they wouldn't.
Yeah, that's really important. Like think about the final user, because I think sometimes like, oh, I understand it, but maybe they don't.
Yeah, and like in copywriting, sometimes you kind of you shouldn't, but sometimes you write for yourself or you think like, oh, this sounds great, like I love how this sounds, but then you're not really thinking about who's reading it, like who the reader is. So yeah, it's more complicated.
Yeah, there's so many important things. Like, what would you say is the most important or the most important things you have to have in mind while writing UX?
While writing UX, I think the most important thing to have in mind is the user. At the end, it's like you need to think about who the user is, and also what are they feeling in that moment that they're going through, like a certain screen or a certain process or whatever. So I think the main difference, or like the most important thing when writing UX, is that you need to be empathetic about the user and their needs and their feelings. Because sometimes, for example, in the fintech industry, you're writing about how to transfer money to another account, so or how to I don't know, something related to their bank, which is something that not people don't like to do. You don't like to deal with your bank and stuff. So I think the most important thing is to really think about how they're feeling, and then trying to find the words that would make their situation easier, or like more of a pleasant experience. Although it might never be pleasant, but you need to really think about what they're going through, and then finding the most concise words to talk about that and
Yes.
guide them in a way.
Yeah, I was reading this book that said it's called Atomic Atoms. It's really good, but it basically said that our brains are always looking for the easiest way to do something. So I
No,
think that
Atomic Habits, I think,
yes,
that one, or yeah, okay, yeah. No, definitely. Like, I think the most important thing in UX writing is always finding the easiest way to say something, and the
yes,
clear way to say something.
definitely. And that yeah, little that takes me right to the next question. Like UX writing has to be so concise and clear and practical. How do you maintain brand voice? Like is something that you have to leave behind, or there is a way to sneak in the brand voice in the UX?
I think there definitely is a way to sneak in the brand voice. It might not be such an in your face kind of voice in a way, especially not in the fintech world. But sometimes you decide what kind of verbs are you going to use for a certain action, or the way that you describe an error screen, like the 404 error. Are we going to have some fun and add like some personality thing, like saying, oh, we're sorry this happened, or oops, you're lost, something like that. You can kind of
Mm,
find those places where you can play around and show the brand voice and tone. But then there are other screens where it's just like instructional. You just need to guide the user to an end goal. And it's kind of hard to add some personality or voice and tone and stuff like that. But there are certainly certain things that we keep in mind to really make the product its own, and
mm,
for it not to sound like any other app. So, but we do that through deciding what kind of verbs we're going to use, what kind of adjectives. Do we use exclamation marks, or like or do we all do we write incomplete sentences, or do we keep it like short? Do we use, I don't know, yeah, just finding like those clear words that are going to repeat themselves, and kind of deciding based on the voice and tone of the brand. So it's harder than to do than in UX, than in copywriting, but it's something that you need to keep in mind just to add a little bit of spice to your UX copy, you
yeah.
know.
And as you mentioned, like UX, it's more of like a collective effort. Like you have to be working with other people, like the designers of the website. How would you describe that dynamic? Like who comes first? You come first, they come first. It's like a going together in this journey to create this product. How does it work?
Well, ideally we work together from the very start. Like there's this like concept called content first design, where a UX writer or a content designer will go in and decide in what way would it be useful for the user to receive this information. So what should they read first? When are they getting this information? Should they get it in an email? Should they get it through a push notification, or in like the home screen or whatever? So ideally, the UX writer works along the UX designer from the ideation phase, or like the brainstorming phase, so that both the designer and the UX writer have the context of what is going on. So generally, I work with UX designers from the start to the very end, where we send the screens down to the software engineers. But yeah, so we work together through all of the steps. Ideally, I get in like in the first from the first moment that the product manager decides that we're going to do something, or like add something or change something or a new feature or whatever, so that I can have a say in how the information is going to be presented. But then there are also times where the UX designer is like, oh, I created this flow and we need the words, so get in and start working on that. But yeah, ideally I start from the very beginning along with the UX designers, and we kind of talk back and forth the way that we want the information to be presented. So yeah, it's a collective effort. I don't think there's any UX writer that works alone, because you really couldn't do anything, because it all depends on the design. So for example, I don't know, in a certain screen, we decide that there isn't the need for that much information. So like the the spaces for text are going to be very small, and then that's a design decision. So we need to work hand in hand. Or sometimes the product manager knows that this new feature needs more explanation, so that's where I jump in. So yeah, it's a joint effort, but ideally I start from the very beginning with the UX designer to ideate and yeah, bring certain different ideas to the table.
Okay, that's so interesting. And like, what would you say? This is like, I bet that now that you're a UX writer, you're much more aware of the user experience, right? Like you see it every time, like you log into a page or like download an app. What would you say is the part of like the user experience that gets mostly overlooked? What would you say? Like should be
I don't
more
know.
important.
I think a lot of it gets overlooked, specifically thinking about like financial products. Sometimes it's just easier to talk about a process with the technical words, but then you see that for the user those might not mean anything. So especially when working with bank apps or any other kind of app that involves money, you see that there isn't much thought to the user experience because it's not friendly, because people are not always used to, not a lot of people, at least in Mexico, have like these bank apps, so it might be harder for some people. So I think what often gets overlooked is specifically like the knowledge that people have when using financial products or any type of product. I think people kind of assume that everybody's gonna know something, and then they're surprised when they send it to the research team, and then you get the results back and you see that it isn't clear at all for people. So I think what gets overlooked is kind of the experience that the market has doing a certain thing and stuff like that. But I also think in the UX, right, in the user experience, writing gets overlooked.
Yeah.
It's only been through the last couple of years, I think maybe 5-10 years maximum, that the term UX writer actually took off, and now people are actively trying to get UX writers on their team, because most of the stuff that was being like presented in products was written by engineers, by software engineers or by designers that might not have the experience or like the sensibility to language. So I think writing gets overlooked still in the user experience, because you might have like this beautiful product that works great, but you don't understand at all because the instructions are not clear or something like that.
Yeah, and I think that also happens with like the localization of UX, because you have to have in mind that, yeah, like who is the customer. And I was reading about how maybe some terms, or even if you want to, like you said, put some humor in them, error messages that might not translate as well to other public. So I think, yeah, that's really interesting to have in mind. So what advice would you give to someone who wants to start on UX copywriting? What would be your advice to like sharpen their skills and get a little better?
I think there's a very, not very big, but there's a community of UX writers in on LinkedIn that you can really like look up, so that you see like their process or like what they're sharing or what they're learning. Because when I first started in my job as UX writer, although I understood like the I guess the technical aspects of how to write copy, or I had the copywriting experience, so I knew kind of like how to think about the user and their expectations and their pains and gains and stuff like that. But I didn't really know how the role of a UX writer fits in a product team or in a design team. So I think what people can find useful is really looking up or looking to connect and talk up with the other UX writers that have done this process, because sometimes writing the copy is not that hard, but really getting your work noticed within your own workspace, or like really standing up for you as a UX writer and putting it out there that content is important, is kind of the hardest thing. So my biggest tip would be to just try to network with other people, try to read what they're writing about their own experiences, reading their blogs, reading like their guides and stuff, just really trying to learn about the experience of other UX writers, because given that it's like not the super popular or common job, there are still different ways in which people go about their jobs every day, and that's kind of like the hardest thing when you start as a UX writer.
It's still like really not explored territory.
Yeah, there are not many like systems in place, I guess. That's what I would say. So you kind of need to figure it out on your own and with your team, but it's always important to connect with other people and see what they're doing and what works for them.
That's perfect. And one final question. What would you say, like being a UX writer and like doing this in Spanish and English has polished your copywriting skills too?
Yeah, definitely. I think it gives you kind of like it makes you really think about the user. Not that in copywriting you don't think about the user, but it's not really a user, it's more like the public or like a reader. But once you work in UX writing, you're kind of hyper aware of how people will perceive this text. So and it helps both in English or Spanish or whatever language you're writing on. Once you start working in UX writing, although it's like very short copy, you really have to understand like the impact of what that copy does. And I think what happened for me was that through UX writing, we do a lot of testing, or we have a lot of like research, and we talk to users and stuff like that. So it made me now want to measure more of my copywriting. Like I want to test my copywriting and start like applying A/B testing and stuff like that. That although we do, it might not always be like a best practice. So yeah, working as a UX writer made me want to apply some of those techniques to my copywriting projects as well.
So, what would you say are the best practices somebody needs to apply while working on UX writing?
I think a very common best practice that you hear a lot of people like in the UX world talk about, it's all about keeping it clear and keeping it concise. So when you're writing, although you might feel tempted to just like write it out in a sentence and tell people what to do in like a very direct way, it might not be the shortest way to do it. And when you're working with UX writing, you have short amounts of like space for text. And also users don't normally read that much in apps or in websites or whatever. So a best practice is to keep it concise, use the least amount of words possible, keeping it clear, trying to not use technical terms or terminology that a normal user might not understand. Also, always thinking about the final user and what their user journey is, like where in their user journey are they seeing the screen, to see what makes sense for them to know. So I think it will be keeping it clear, keeping it concise, always thinking about the user, and also, of course, finding like the shortest and sweetest way to say something while keeping all of the grammar in check, no typos. Try to like really go over your UX copy, although it might be just like a small button or like micro copy. It's always important to like keep it clear. And one last best practice would be like to always try and evaluate your copy. If you have the chance to evaluate through certain software where you measure something like an A/B testing, or you can work with the UX research department and ask users questions about whether they're understanding or not the copy. I think that's also something very important, that it's what can really make or break your product, whether or not you have clear UX copy that is actually working and that your users like and understand.
Okay. And talking about like localizing UX, what's the most important thing you'll do or have in mind while doing that between English and Spanish?
I think localization in UX writing is something that's very interesting, because so many apps are like their first version would be in English, and then they take that and apply it to Spanish. And I think what's most important when writing UX copy is that you should always try to keep it like very standard. Although you might be tempted to use like an idiom or like some local jargon and stuff like that, that's only gonna make the localization efforts way harder than they already are. So as you should keep your language standard You should always try to find words that are common, that you know that they won't be that hard to translate. Although you might not always be aware of that, but you should always just try to keep it as simple as possible and try to just not use things that might be so distinctive that then make it hard to create like a version in Spanish or in Portuguese or something like that. So keeping it standard and straying away from idioms and stuff like that just might make the work harder.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for being here. And if you want to share some platforms people may follow you on.
Sure. Well, people can find me on LinkedIn with my full name, so Andrea Zúñiga. And they should also check out Ellipsis Copywriting for more information about copywriting and our projects and all of the services that we offer, because I really think that we have like a solid team. And although I love UX writing, I still love copywriting and would love to follow with that.
Well, thank you so much. And thank you everybody who tuned into the TranslaStars podcast.
Thank you.